Hello, and welcome to Smeg and the Femmes, podcast to discuss Red Dwarf from a different perspective. I'm Janamali, and today I'll be talking about Series 2, Episode 6, Parallel Universe, with the help of my guests, Veronica Rich and Ace. So, welcome back to both of you.
Thank you. Very excited to be here once again.
Me as well.
Okay, so let's begin at the very beginning with, of course, which is the pre-credit sequence, and of course is tongue-tied. And let's just start with this. I mean, the words I'd use, I think, the description, the way I describe it is charmingly silly.
Absolutely, and I think this is such a good example of using your cast to your advantage. I think this is really like Danny's moment to shine, um, so to speak. And it's just a little break from what we've seen, like who was expecting a musical number? Like I certainly wasn't. I remember my partner showing me this episode and be like, oh, this is the one I'm so excited to show you this one, like you got to pay attention to this. And I was like, what's going on? She's like, just watch, And I was like, oh my God, this is probably like the least thing I was expecting. And it was so much fun. And, got stuck in my head and we were singing it to each other for weeks afterwards.
Yeah, I love the way they don't explain it for several minutes, until it cuts back to Kat saying, "No, this isn't the one." I mean, they just sort of randomly, start the episode with a musical number.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really get to see, Danny as the cat, singing, dancing, and it's just so it's such a good use of your cast, the talents that you have. And it really like stands on its own.
Your past strengths, which obviously Danny is a wonderful dancer, and he can also sing, and so I mean it just makes sense, to sort of you use it. I mean, of course, I don't know. You probably do know that he actually released a version of this song as a single and had a minor hit with it here in the UK.
Oh yeah, I did. I've seen the music video, and like that's like one of the points is like it stands on its own, man. Like it's not just it's really silly and funny, but like it's not just that, right? Like it's actually good.
Yeah, it is. It's a very sort of interesting song. I mean, of course, it was originally written by Howard Goodall for one of the radio sketches that Robin Doug sort of wrote before Red Dwarf, But they sort of it seems to be Danny and Craig who were the sort of driving force behind the sort of jazzing it up, and of course Charles Organs also choreographed tongue tied, So I mean, he was definitely making himself useful in the series. So, Vero, what do you think of Tongue Tied?
Well, I think it's interesting. You can't really control your dreams and what happens in them, but I find it interesting that Cat's dream is he's not entirely surrounded by pretty girl cats. I mean, it's not just him and a bunch of girl cats. Lister and Rimmer. Why is Rimmer there on equal footing with Lister and the dance crew? Why is Rimmer even there? Because he doesn't even like Rimmer, presumably. So I just thought that was kind of funny that he's got the three of them. He's thinking of him and themselves as the posse, and then the girl cats are like all in the background, or the girls.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting. I mean, of course, there's that famous line in I think it's Confidence and Paranoia, where Lister says, "You don't dream about someone you don't feel something for." I mean, obviously, we usually use that in the context of him dreaming about Rimmer and Blue, But I mean, it works here as well, I mean,
right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really think the cat, has developed some kind of, affection for mostly Lister, but even Rimmer and Holly a little bit.
Yeah, I think it really starts to show a bit more of that like family dynamic, like we saw in the last episode, Queeg. Holly, when he's saying his farewell, says something about each of the crew that shows like he knows them, and there's some care between them. And I think this is kind of Cat's version of that, even if it's not saying it outright, because it's something that you notice. They're all there. They're all having fun. They're all getting along and dancing and being silly together.
Yeah, it's really very sweet, And another thing which occurred to me, which probably wouldn't have, if the Promised Land hadn't come out and sort of retconned his character to some extent, But you can argue that Cats, I mean, this song is all about approaching women and him being insecure about approaching women. I mean, it's not his usual sort of confident persona at all. And you can kind of argue that's because it's a dream and it's kind of closer to his real personality. Because we find out in the Promised Land, that he was actually around Lady Cats in his very very young sort of teenager at least, and was considered a hopeless geek, and that's why they left him behind, So I mean, that kind of adds sort of poignancy to Tongue Tied, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that like we see is him performing as well. Like he's such a performative character. I mean, his personality, his clothes, his voice, the way that he carries himself. And I think in this episode in particular, you see the cat kind of acting a lot. There's this in his dream where it's not only that they're dancing and stuff, that they're on a stage for someone to see. And later in the episode, I made a point, and I'm sure we'll get there then. But when he meets the dog for the first time, he's talking. He's not talking to the dog, and there's no one else there. He's talking as if to an audience. He's so performative, so out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's always putting on a show.
Yeah. I mean, of course, he does actually say, in the Promised Land, that after the other cats sort of abandoned him, that he vowed he'd never be uncool again, and so I mean, it was a conscious decision on his part, to sort of embrace coolness, So I mean, it does definitely lend, sort of when you rewatch these earlier episodes, it adds an extra element to them, and I think it makes Cat a more interesting character, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Because I mean, like, if you think of him just as a cat, cats they're always like a bit, me or whatever. But that's really his personality that he's putting on a show. He's really doing it to be seen, even though there's hardly anyone to see him.
Yes, I mean, and of course it does absolutely make sense, with regards to his character. Just one more thing about Tongue Tied. I mean, I think, I mean, obviously it's meant it kind of sort of puzzles me sometimes when people, will complain, that Chris and Craig's dancing is crap because I mean, of course it's crap. It's a comedy number, and they're not expert dancers. I mean, they're supposed to be, be Danny's sort of backup dancers, basically. So I mean, why would they be wonderful dancers?
No, absolutely. And I think that their dancing is very in character. It's not just that they're bad at dancing, it's that they're still there as Rimmer and Lister. They're still in character. And I think
Exactly.
that's
Yeah. I
how
mean, they're sort of acting and dancing at the same time.
yeah.
Which, I mean, it must be really difficult to do. Because you're obviously you're doing two things at once. You're trying not to fall over on a slippery dance floor, and you're trying to stay in character. I mean, yeah, that's really difficult. I mean, no wonder Craig, didn't enjoy filming this because I mean, not being a professional dancer like Danny, it must be really sort of physically draining, I imagine.
Yeah. And I
It's
think
really
like
worth it, It was so fun.
it was. And I think it's that's how the cat sees them too, right? Like this is his dream. It's pure his opinions, and like he would think that they absolutely have no style and cannot dance
One
whatsoever.
good thing about this remember being better dancers than he is, is it? I mean, oh, I mean, he could, it's unlikely, it's more likely that he's going to dream of being a star of his own Broadway show. Because
Mhm.
that's cat for you.
It's like giving your bridesmaids ugly dresses so that you stand out as the bride.
Exactly, yeah, metaphor, yes. I mean, exactly, yeah. Right, okay. I guess we've talked enough about tongue tie. We should probably sort of dive into the next scene, which is kind of, oh, I mean, I don't want to say problematic because it's intentionally problematic. I mean, basically, where we sort of fade into and we get to sort of see Rimmer's attitude. Well, we've already had a taste of it, but I mean, we get to see Rimmer's sort of attitude to women, and well, it's terrible, basically.
I want to know why he felt the need to say out loud that he's picturing Lister in a leather mini and peephole bra, and why, oh why, instead of approaching him from the side as you would do, why does he come stand right next to him and put his crotch right next to his head at eye level if he were to turn and look to do his little pickup?
whilst wearing an incredibly camp outfit where you can basically see his penis.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. That outfit, honestly, like it's such a Rimmer thing to do, right? Like
And God love Chris Berry for leaning into it.
yeah, I mean, like you would think that's so typical Rimmer, right? He's all show and no substance. Like he makes I bet he was on that bike for like maybe like just what we saw him on. I bet he just popped on it like right as we came into the shot. He probably doesn't cycle on it at all, but he gets dressed up, he puts on, the spandex shorts, he's got his little suspenders and the helmet, which is just ridiculous. I mean, he's on a standing bike. Why do you need a helmet, right? And his sporty little shirt and it's all tight and like, oh, look at me, look at my muscles, look at me working out, right? And he's probably on the bike for like 2 seconds and then oh, he's done, like it's all for show.
It's this outfit. I mean, in the audio commentary, Danny actually says, if you wore that to Heaven, which is a gay nightclub in London, you'd fit right in.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me. I think this scene is just one of the parts of this episode that will definitely, I think, add to the slashiness rating of this episode.
It really is a very slashy episode. I mean. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say in advance, slashiness does include Femmes slash, so you can count Deb and Arlene as well.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, okay, so, yeah. Well, anyway, obviously the purpose of this scene is to set up, that Rimmer has a terrible attitude to women, with the hypnotising them, etc., etc., and it pays off later on when we meet Arlene. Yeah. Oh, I'm just going to say one more thing. I do like that we see Lister knitting in this scene, and it's not commented, it's not drawn attention to at all. He's just casually knitting, sitting there knitting.
Yeah, I that's one thing I noticed too. I think Lister has like such um, a lackadaisical kind of view on gender stereotypes, I think, and it's never like really called out. But I mean, later we see him walking around in a pink robe and with like I don't think it's something that bothers him at all. So
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean that's one of the reasons why I'm less keen on Series 7, because it's like when they have a woman around, he suddenly becomes all self conscious about it, I'm not gay, ish, I mean, whereas I kind of much preferred it, when he's like this, not bothered about how it might make him look, if he's knitting or if he's sitting in front of a romantic film, crying his eyes out. I mean, it's just a much more appealing version of his character.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's like one of the things he knows about himself too. Although I think he thinks of himself more uh, amenable to women or treats women better than I think he actually does, which he kind of finds out himself in the end of this episode. But
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, obviously Rimmer, as in, well, I probably best specify Arnold comes out this looking bad, but I mean, Dave doesn't really come out looking that great either. So I mean, we will cover both of them, in that respect.
And even in mid episode, one of the things that jumped out, and I don't want to jump ahead, but since you all brought up the whole thing with Lister, for all his protestations of not treating women like aliens to be conquered or figured out, when they're having a conversation in the parallel universe, he seems a little too incredulous when Deb and Arlene start talking about Nellie Armstrong and William Shakespeare and all. I mean, his response to it is like, Nellie Armstrong, and it's a little on the edge of, you may be progressive, but you have grown up immersed in toxic masculinity and the patriarchy too, buddy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
It's kind of very sort of, someone who thinks they're liberal, being confronted, with something which sort of challenges their worldview, and they realise that they're not actually quite as liberal as they thought they were, thought they were, or at least, of course, does he actually realise that? It's debatable, but I mean, he reacts in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect him to react.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
One thing I did want to say, when we get into and Arlene's bunk room is, and he opens the her locker. We notice, that Deborah's got a sort of topless male pin-up in her locker, which fair enough. There's nothing wrong with that, but the equivalent in for Dave is a picture of Marilyn Monroe, just her face, and she's not, posed particularly provocatively, So I mean, you'd think just I did wonder myself, well, couldn't they have found, a sort of recognisable heartthrob male actor, or is there a reason why they're making it a sort of anonymous shirtless man?
Well, I think from my perspective is that they really went over the top with the parallel universe. Like it is essentially just an opposite of Arnold and Dave's universe. But I think there's things that they have exaggerated, I think, to make the point, right? Like Arlene's magazines like are out on show, where we don't really see Arnold as much showy with that kind of thing. And like you said, the topless pinup in the locker. And I think the overall kind of confidence level of both Deb and Arlene being a bit more pushy than the boys, right? I think that things in this universe have been intentionally um, like overdone just to make that point.
And it makes sense because, it's a half-hour episode. You've got a very short amount of time to make your point visually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the visual storytelling here is it really goes to like nail the point home.
Yeah. Yeah. It is kind of, hammering it home, and painting with broad strokes because they've only got half an hour and they've got to sort of make a point in a limited amount of time. hmm which of course probably explains why Arlene sort of comes across so Actually, before we get to Arlie, I've got just looking at my notes here. I've got one more thing about the bunk room. Did you notice in Arlie and Deb's bunk room instead of a banana are two dice? Does that mean what I think it means?
You know what? I noticed that, but never thought about it. And I think you're right. I think that's a clever bit of visual storytelling there.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I mean, of course, obviously, it's very sort of cisgender centric. This is an episode that came out in 1988. So I mean, obviously they're not trying to sort of examine trans issues in any way whatsoever. So I mean, it is what it is basically. It's a joke about stereotypically traditionally male or female body parts. What are considered to be male and female body parts. Okay, so moving on to Arlene's behaviour. One thing I did notice is in the disco scene, Arnold says, well, I think you're a bit drunk. I always get like this when I'm drunk as well, But the thing is, in the bunk room beforehand, this is before they've drunk any alcohol whatsoever. She slaps his ass, So I mean,
Yeah, and I think this is like I was saying before, like they are so confident. Both Deb and Arlene in particular, they have confidence that the boys just like don't have. Like, I think that's a huge like difference, especially between the Rimmers, because we know our Rimmer is kind of a cowardly worm, you know. Um, but she's just really out there.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you can. I mean, I have seen it argued, that the reason Arnie is so confident is because, well, it's a male version of her. So I mean, would she have been as confident with some random man? I mean, maybe not.
Maybe not, but we still don't see, Arnold acting with that kind of confidence and, you know, forwardness towards either, Deb or Arlene.
I,
She is making the first move here.
I wonder if there's an element of this is their home turf. Like the boys have come onto their ship, into their home, into their house. So I don't know that it would be any different if they had gone over to their ship, but maybe there's a slight element of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that would definitely explain a lot. Yes, I mean obviously yes. I mean they are on their turf. I suppose also I think you may have said this before Vero. I mean it's possible that Ollie and Deb aren't supposed to be exactly exactly reflections of Dave and Arnold. I mean, there are differences. And we see some of them. I mean, maybe it's not the exact equivalent. I mean, for example, dog is clearly not an exact equivalent of cat. In any way at all.
I like, yeah, I made a little note here that just getting into the casting a little bit, that the actors they chose to play Arlene and Deb were so good. And I've read the behind the scenes where, the actress Suzanne who played Arlene wasn't really sure, how she was going to portray it. And her performance on the day of taping was different than how they had rehearsed it. And she hadn't quite honed it yet and was still working on it. But they did an amazing job just incorporating Craig's and Chris's movements and ticks into a more aggressive female performance than we're used to seeing. And they didn't make it exactly parallel to them, but they did enough to bring across that you're looking at this is what Dave Lister would look like if he was a woman. This is how he would, this is how he would move and act. This is a good way of looking at how Arnold Rimmer would be as a woman. This is how he would move and act and some of his expressions, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And another thing about like the casting is like I was actually like watching this episode and knowing kind of the cultural context behind the show. Like 89, it's British, it's comedy, but the choice to make them, equivalent it instead of like saying they could have had them be, really kind of stereotypically sexy, dressed provocatively, like really playing up like they are the pretty feminine woman version of them, but really it's just them as people in a different gender.
Yeah, Rob and Doug are very good at doing hinting. I mean, they wrote this and they wrote Cat and everything, but credit to the actors, but also credit to the writers for writing ways of suggesting things. Like I've said about Cat in the beginning, Cat gives you femininity, if that's a word, without parodying a cat, without having the pointed ears and the whiskers and the tail. He's still a cat. He gives you the suggestion of it, and they kind of give you the suggestion of Rimmer and Lister.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like they really could have done this in a different way, but the way that they portrayed like Rimmer and Lister just in the exact same kind of, Lister's kind of slobby, like burping, Yankee Doodle dandy and that kind of way where they really could have like made them very feminine, very not to say that Angela and Suzanne aren't good-looking women, but they could have chose, very stereotypically beautiful, younger versions, of
Mhm.
to play Rimmer and Lister, and I think the way that they go about it is it just really nails home like the kind of point that they're portraying, like how differently Rimmer and Lister treat women in their own universe and how badly they treat them, and like it's surprising that they're even talking about it, for a a show of that era, of that taste, like it's actually kind of refreshing.
Mhm.
Yeah, interestingly, in the sort of series two documentary, the bit about parallel universe, Rob and Doug, are kind of down on themselves about it. They think Doug describes it as like written by two earnest schoolboys. So they don't sort of pat themselves on the back for this episode at all. But I think it is an interesting episode. I mean, yes, it's sort of heavy-handed in a lot of ways, but I mean, it's fascinating as well.
Yeah, and I think it has to be for the genre, like as the kind of show that it is, the way that it does these things, I think it's very smart and brave and funny. Like they really just did it as it should be done for a show, like for a comedy show, and I think, yeah, I think it was pulled off really well.
Yeah. 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 I definitely agree with what you were saying, but about it was such a relief, that they cast actors who actually looked, like they could be sort of female versions of Chris and Craig, rather than going sort of glamour, and dress them in exactly the same way as the male actors. It's just so refreshing, because usually when you see a female version of a male character, they almost always sort of sex them up, and it's really refreshing that they didn't, And I say that, as a gay woman who does find both actresses attractive, just not in a sort of stereotypical, conventionally feminine kind of way.
I don't want to jump ahead of you, Janamali, since it's your show, but I wanted, there seems like kind of a natural little break here. I just wanted to make a point how much I love Rimmer and Lister, Dave and Arnold's conversation in the disco later about how awful their counterparts are and how it's just pure gold, how they're talking about.
It's
Oh
just so
yeah,
funny the way
absolutely.
it's just so funny the way Dave says, call me crazy, but I don't find burping and eating vindaloo attractive.
Yeah, and it's funny because up until now we've really been focused on like Arnold and how he treats women and how he treats them badly and like his thoughts are he has a closed mind, and then here we go and oh well, it's not just him. Lister's outlook isn't like all perfect and you know
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, both of them have their flaws, definitely. Oh, I'm just gonna grab this bit from my notes quickly. I love the fact, that Arnold gets a line. Arlene's gone off to get some sexy videos. She's so
Yes,
sweet.
yeah.
oh yeah, she thinks that
Together
these
like
see
Church
too
and
much. Yeah, I love that. I made a note of that as well.
Arlene is cleverer than she looks.
I mean the queer reading of that is really like, oh, she knows what's going on. You could see it as the basic, like equivalent of, two men thinking that or men thinking that a video of two women together would be sexy, but like honestly reading it from the queer perspective, and I think that's why we're here to
We are,
read
yeah.
Red Dwarf from the
Humanity.
different perspective.
Mhm.
Exactly. It's a lot funnier that way, and as Vero says, like, yeah, that's definitely adding to the slashiness score of this episode. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I need
Okay.
to throw in another slashy comment to earlier in the episode where they're sitting on their own ship with the Holly Hop Drive, and just because I don't want to forget it, where Lister goes, "Hang on, this is another Red Dwarf with another Rimmer and Lister on board," and I'm thinking, aren't you forgetting a couple of people there?
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely got a one-track mind.
Yeah. Sorry. Back to the videos because
It's
that's
okay.
just
Yeah, I was
that's
actually
great.
going to point out from my notes another interesting, thing which has a slashy undertone, which is the fact, that Arnold is quite happy admitting that he finds Deb attractive.
Yes.
Oh yes, the one with the juicy jugs. I'm sure that was the only thing about her you find attractive.
Mhm.
And you know what? Another point, if you don't mind me bringing it up, is Holly during all this. Like, I find it really hilarious how immediately he takes to Hilly, and it got me wondering if he didn't know what the Holly Hop Drive was about the entire time and exactly where they were going. Because I
I
mean, we
haven't
just saw him
actually.
having fun.
I
Yeah, well, I mean,
thought of
we
that, but that is
just
such a good point. Yeah.
because we see him having fun in Queeg, like doing whatever, and I think this is just another extension of that. He's like, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun? Like I need a little action, And if he's smart enough and Hilly's smart enough to think, then they would have known that, where I think he knew where they were going, and I don't think that the Holly Hop Drive was broken at all. I don't think they needed to wait, whatever 17 hours or whatever it is that he says it's going to take for them to fix it, because I don't think they were fixing anything.
No.
I mean, now you mention it, I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to believe a word Holly said again.
One of the best lines. Hal, what's that on your face? What face?
What face? Oh, that's computer rash. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do want to. I mean, I mean, I'm going to get more into this in series 3, obviously. But we should say a big welcome to Hattie Hayridge.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Honestly, one of the highlights of this episode is introducing her, and then her being able to come back as Holly later.
Yep.
I mean, she just, I mean, you instantly accept her as a female version of Holly. She just, nails it from the beginning.
Yeah, I could have watched the two of them together a little more.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's the only time we get both Hollies on screen at the same time. It's a shame they didn't get a bit more airtime. Of course, they had
Yeah, it really would have been.
alternates to fit in. Yeah, sorry, I was just going
And
to say
they
we should probably mention Doug as well. He's funny.
Yeah, actually, that was next in my notes as well.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say I do
With
like
the
that they didn't just go for a female cat. It makes it more interesting to have a dog.
Yeah, I live with both dogs and cats, so their interactions just had me rolling.
It's such
And
a
I
good
think
idea
it
to have those
also
cats and dogs sort of natural enemies, or at least natural opposites. So obviously they're going to grate against each other.
and I think it also brings up an interesting kind of point about gender here, because we know, like, I could see, a dog being the opposite of the cat, but to be real opposite, like, if you're thinking about it, they should be opposite genders. But if you really think about, animals don't have gender,
Yeah.
so really we don't know the actual sex of those characters, like, and it doesn't matter, it's how they show themselves. But if you think about it, you kind of like see, like, oh, the maybe the cat has a bit more of a feminine air about him, and maybe the dog has a bit more of a masculine air about him. But really, what I took away from it, you see it from, like, a modern queer perspective, it's really that, like, I don't think that they even consider gender at all, and you can really see, this episode as proof of, Cat being a non-binary character.
I mean, honestly, Cat makes more sense as a non-binary character, really. I mean, I mean, I obviously it was one of those things that Rob and Doug were not aware that we're not aware they were writing. But I mean, he makes far more sense as a non-binary character, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, when you're looking at shows of, you know, past eras, like, you really have to project those kind of things onto them. They weren't openly um talking about or showing characters and their queerness and in the way that we understand it today. And I think that it's completely okay to look at a character like that and just be like, I absolutely see them as trans, as non-binary, as gay, lesbian, bi, whatever. because they didn't really have the chance to show that canonically back then, with censorship and the way society was. And thankfully, we get to be a little more open about that today, at least, where we are in the world.
I wonder
Uh,
if
so-
I'm sorry.
oh, carry on. That was the point.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I wonder if men like straight men watching this, if they watch it and they see Arlene's aggressiveness trying to sleep with Arnold, and Arnold, kind of horrifyingly pulling back from it. If they look at it as thinking, oh, well, she's just too aggressive, guys wouldn't like that. Whereas I look at it and I think, well, I think, she does like sex. She is somewhat aggressive, but maybe he's just, and this has been brought up by other, I'm not the first to bring this up. It's been brought up by other Adore fans. Maybe he's just more Ace than anyone thinks. Maybe he's just not interested. Demisexual or asexual, aromantic. I mean, there's more than one clue throughout the series that he could be like that. But this is, it's an interesting reading of it.
And you know what? I think there's a lot of evidence in this episode, particularly. I mean, even at the beginning, like literally one of the first interactions in this episode is him being like, "Oh, well, why do you care so much about sex? Where's the settling down?" Right? It's like for all of the kind of like lewdnesses that Arnold Rimmer kind of like puts out in the show, like who's to say those aren't just for show? Because I know as an asexual person, like you do perform kind of like those kind of things to fit in, or even if without real intention behind them, like you can say those things, do those things. And I think a lot of Rimmer's character is about, trying to fit in and look more masculine, more stereotypical, more ideal than he is. So yeah, I think that's like a really, really good point, Vero.
Yeah,
And
as a yeah, I mean, as kind of an aromantic, asexual person myself, I say kind of, I pretty much am. Yeah, you can go in one direction of sort of performative, or you can kind of go in the other direction of I'm not even going to try, which has kind of been my default setting for the last 20 or so years.
And you know what? Who's to say that Arlene isn't making those overtures and being so strong about it because she knows the same thing that he knows, that it's not going to come to anything, and she's really performing for Deb. Honestly, that's how I read it. To see like, oh, look, when there's actually a man here, how I can actually like act. See, I'm normal. I'm into it. Whatever. And then she goes back and sits with Deb and says like, oh, there's going to be 2 pairs of boots under the bed tonight. Like it's all performance, And I've seen it in real life.
like Arnold.
Yeah.
And I love Deb's response to it. She's very Lister. She's like, it's not going to happen. He's not interested.
Yeah.
It's very Lister.
Yeah, I do want to say, Angela Bruce is also great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And she's got a sort of less showy performance, less sort of showy part than Arlene has. Because obviously she's being the more sort of laid back one, as you'd expect with Lister. But she really does embody a female Lister.
I would love to have these 2 actors back in a future special. I would love to see their middle-aged takes on Rimmer and Lister and the interactions among the 4 of them.
I mean, really,
absolutely.
I think that is absolutely sort of staring Doug in the face. For his next special, go back to the parallel universe. It practically writes itself. Especially with Jim and Bexley as well, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean that's another one of those things where the way this episode ends, gives me the same kind of vibes as you're saying, Out of Time, where like it feels like they didn't have an ending and they just ended it, but it comedically it just works. They didn't have a plan for Jim and Bexley and Lister's pregnancy, and I mean you see, when we come back and backwards, like that's kind of just explained in a text scroll, and then we're back to Rimmer and Lister and the cat, and
I want to say, it's just So Rob and Doug, just sort of, do a rare continuity callback from to Future Echoes, and then in the next episode backwards, they just drop it like a stone. It's over. They've gone. Forget about it.
Mm.
Oh, also, we are overrunning somewhat, so we're going to have to sort of start wrapping it up. I mean, I thought we would because this is such a juicy episode. So, do either of you have any other points you were really dying to make?
Well, I just wanted to talk briefly about the cat and the dog when they're at the disco, and I just find it funny that the cat, is drinking milk out of a champagne glass, like it's some fancy thing. And, like, he is at an elegant ball, and dog is at the disco. He's like, "That's dance. This is dancing, right? Hold my champagne flute full of probably like cream or milk." And I love their interactions at the disco. It's such a short little bit,
It's so
but I find them so
cat
funny.
cat behavior, dog behavior. It's classic.
Mm-hmm.
Vero, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, two minor points. The first one kind of humorous. I think Rimmer used up an entire season's worth of listies in this episode, and calling him that.
Sorry, what's in this episode?
Listies.
Oh yes, Listy, of course, yeah, God.
Yes. And then also, it's kind of cute. I mean, it's played for laughs, the joke he's making about all the awful things about being pregnant and having to have a cesarean and all. But in a way, it's sort of cute how eager he is for Lister to be pregnant.
I mean, he actually says, "I'm going to be an uncle."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's another thing about Rimmer. He says earlier this episode, and again in Better Than Life, is like he at least thinks that he wants a family, whether or not he's ready for that now or his own. But I mean, the desire is there. He wants to settle down. He wants kids or whatever. And I think this could be that kind of coming out a bit,
Yep.
Yeah, and just that final scene, we really kind of see, how the way that Lister treats women as well, as much as he thinks he's so much better than Rimmer. He really isn't that great. It's just in a different way that Rimmer is. The way when
they've both grown up with toxic masculinity. And they both internalized it to some extent, I guess.
Yeah, and even Deb mentioning, like, well, that was the man supposed to deal with that part of it, the conflict, you're the one who gets pregnant or whatever. Like, it's none of my business. And I think Lister learned a lesson there.
Yeah. I did want to say one thing. One thing about this episode, which maybe doesn't work quite as well, is the pink frilly scutters. In my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a bit gauche in my opinion.
I mean, I guess it's difficult to make scutters look feminine without going way over the top, But it doesn't quite work for me. But it's a minor thing.
It's true, but I want one of the baby scutters.
They are very cute, yes.
Very cute, yes.
Right, okay. We're seriously overrunning, which is okay. It's not a problem, but I mean, we should probably start to wrap up now. So, how would both of you rate this episode, both overall and for slashiness? Vera, go first if you like.
Well, slashiness. I think I have to slap a large old 10 on it. I'm sorry. I just. I don't even know where to. I think I may let someone else tackle the reasons why, and you all may have a lower rating on it than I do, but I'll leave that there. And then just overall, I really like it. I think I give it a 9 for overall. It does have some problematic, but I think it leans into the problematic, and I think most of the problematic is there on purpose, and I think it's trying to make a point that, quite frankly, in 1988 was pretty sophisticated. I mean, now it's a little simplistic, but back then, I was alive to see other shows and other very special episodes of other things, and this was better than the typical for gender.
So, Ace?
Oh, well, you know this is my favorite episode, so I'm going to be a little biased here, but overall rating 11 out of 10. Absolutely love it. I'm very enamored with Dev and Arlene and the whole concept. I think it's fun and it makes a good point. And it uses its medium of comedy to put forth really good points, and it's funny and there's everything that I want in it. So yes, 11 out of 10 overall rating, and Slashiness another 10 out of 10. I think I agree with Vero on this one. There's just we brought up a bunch of points when we were talking there, so I won't reiterate everything, but yeah, everything from the "you be a woman" scene in the beginning to she thinks a tape of two men getting together will turn me on. Just choose. Absolutely, 10 out of 10 on both fronts.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to do my own ratings. Overall score out of 10. I think 8. I mean, I enjoy this episode a lot. It's a quality episode. Slashing a score out of 10. I think I'm going to have to give it 10 out of 10 as well because, I mean, honestly, for an episode which is ostensibly about men pursuing women or vice versa, this is the queerest episode yet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Smeg and the Femmes. Thank you to Hora Gomet for technical help, and also thank you to my guests, Ace and Veronica Rich. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed listening. If you'd like to give us feedback, you can do so on either Tumblr or Discord, the posts where I've linked to this episode. You can also email us at smegandthefemmes@gmail.com. And the next episode we'll be covering is the start of a new era with Series 3 and Backwards. I hope you'll join us then. For now, goodbye.